My son let me be locked outside his wedding, not knowing about the $55 million gift I had planned. Summit Cafe and Bar looked like it was built for Instagram Edison bulbs, exposed brick, succulents too perfect to be real. The chalkboard said truffle omelets $27. I thought about how many firehouse dinners 27 bucks used to buy. Evan was already there, white shirt, shoulders tight. Sophia sat beside him, posture perfect, mimosa glowing like liquid gold. Across from them, her father Victor smiled the way men smile when they own the room. Walter, Victor said, raising his glass. Firefighting admirable, but obsolete. Leverage builds families now. Sophia's tone was silk over steel. We're just trying to elevate the Hayes brand. Modern optics, less soot. I stared at her. There's nothing primitive about carrying strangers out of fire. She smiled thinly. And yet, sentiment doesn't scale, does it? Evan stayed silent. That silence burned hotter than any flame I'd ever walked through. I guess 99% of you will hear this. Sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you, and where are you listening? They called it a neutral brunch. Sophia's word, not mine. Summit Cafe and Bar, one of those suburban spots that tries too hard to look effortless. Edison bulbs, exposed brick, every table topped with a tiny succulent that looked too symmetrical to be real. The chalkboard behind the counter read truffle omelets $27. I looked at it and thought about how many dinners at the firehouse $27 used to cover. I was early. Old habits. Fire captains hate being late, even to peacetime events. When the call comes, you don't stroll in with a smile. You arrive ready. Evan waved from the corner booth, white shirt, shoulders tense. Sophia sat beside him, perfect posture, perfect lipstick, tapping her phone screen with nails that matched the mimosa in her hand. Across from them, her father, Victor, looked like a man who'd never waited for anything longer than his valet ticket. Navy blazer. Pocket square folded sharp enough to cut. I slid into the booth. Morning. Victor lifted his glass. Walter, finally, the man of the hour. His tone had that practiced warmth, the kind that leaves no fingerprints. We've heard so much about you, Fire Captain, right? Admirable. Dangerous, too. But then again, some men need danger to feel useful. Sophia swirled her mimosa and smiled. Firefighting. It's very, I don't know, primitive. All that running into flames. We live in a world of strategy now. Evan shifted. Soph dads. She patted his wrist like a pet, calming down. I'm just saying the brand we're building needs sharper optics. I let the word hang there. Brand. Like she was pitching a perfume instead of a marriage. There's nothing primitive about carrying strangers out of a fifth-floor walk-up at 2 a.m, I said. She blinked once. The kind of blink that says this conversation is off-script. Victor leaned back, resting an arm along the booth. Public service is admirable, Walter. But leverage is how families survive. You understand that. Leverage. There it was again, money as morality. I watched the light from the window cut across their table, bright enough to show a hairline crack in the plaster above Victor's head. Thin, jagged, almost beautiful. You can tell a building's age by the way it cracks. People, too. Sophia smiled over her glass. Evan and I are lucky to have guidance from both sides, your discipline and my father's strategy. I could taste the sweet rot under the words. I'd smelled it before after a fire, when something expensive burns and people pretend it's just smoke. Victor looked at my hands, the roughness that never really goes away. You must be proud of him, walking into the private sector. A step up from, well, he gestured vaguely as if service were something sticky he didn't want on his cuff. Evan stayed silent. That silence hit harder than any insult. I sipped my coffee. Cold. Proud doesn't start to cover it, I said. He's his mother's son. Sophia tilted her head. Ruth was the one who passed, right? Yes. She sounds lovely. I suppose that's where he gets his sentimentality. The words slid out of her mouth, soft as silk and sharp as wire. I set my cup down carefully. There was a brief tremor in my hand, the kind that precedes a breach charge or a bad decision. Ruth's voice flashed through my head, lavender on her neck, whispering, You did the right thing, Walt, even when it hurts. So I smiled. Sentimentality builds homes. Strategy just sells them. Victor laughed, too loud, too polished. And yet no equity stake in that, is there? I didn't answer. I just ordered black coffee and glanced up at that hairline crack again. It ran right through the word Summit painted on the wall, splitting it clean in half. I didn't argue with them. I just noted exactly where the wall had cracked. Because that's the thing about cracks, you can ignore them, paint over them, pretend they don't exist. But one day, the whole structure shifts, and when it does, it won't be the fire that brings it down. The house still smelled like lavender. Ruth's scent, her favorite cleaner, the cheap kind from the grocery store that somehow made everything feel rich. She used to say it made the air quiet. When I stepped inside that afternoon, the air wasn't quiet. It was crowded. The Ring camera chimed as I opened the door. Sunlight stretched across the maple floor, catching on paint cans stacked by the wall. Swiss Coffee, the label read. Not white, not beige, just something pretending to be both. From down the hall came the quick snap-snap of a tape measure, then her voice. 17 feet, give or take. I walked toward Ruth's room. Sophia stood there, back straight, leggings and silk blouse like she'd stepped out of a home improvement ad, tape measure in one hand, iPhone in the other. The cedar chest Ruth and I bought the year we married our first splurge was now a stand for a Dior handbag. She didn't even look up. Oh, hey, Walt, she said, distracted. We're modernizing. This room gets such beautiful light for a nursery. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just took in the sound of the tape retracting, sharp and quick like the snap of a belt. I finally said, "That's my wife's room." Evan's voice came from the hallway, hesitant. "Dad, we talked about flow. The new layout opens everything up." "Flow," I repeated, tasting the word. It sounded like something you'd say about plumbing, not people. Sophia smiled. "Walls can be stubborn. People too." She crouched to photograph the corner where Ruth used to keep a wicker laundry basket. My veterans' medals, which had hung above that space since the day I retired, were stacked neatly on the floor in a cardboard box labeled miscellaneous. I picked up my Omega from the dresser, the one Ruth gave me after my last structure fire. The watch had a faint scuff from when it hit the rig's ladder years ago. I slid it onto my wrist slowly, the motion deliberate, like armor. "This house has stood since 1959, I said. "It's seen storms that could tear the siding off, but it's never needed your version of modern." Evan shifted his weight. "Soph's just trying to help, Dad." "Help with what? Paint? Wallpaper?" Sophia straightened, holding the tape measure against her palm. "With perception, your home tells your story. Right now, it says, old grief. We can update that, make it hopeful." Her tone was soft, reasonable, the kind that sells expensive lies. I looked at her, then at my son. "When you two build your own story, build it anywhere you want, but not here." Silence stretched. The kind of silence you hear at a funeral before someone lies about how the dead would have wanted it. Evan's eyes darted to the floor, avoiding mine. That's when I knew it wasn't just Sophia talking. He'd learned her language. Flow, modernizing, brand, words that made home sound like portfolios. I ran my thumb along the cedar chest, feeling the carved initials R+W barely visible anymore. Ruth once told me, "If you keep something long enough, it starts to remember you." The sunlight hit the floor again, glinting off a faint scuff shaped like the heel of my boot right where she used to stand to brush her hair. I exhaled. "That room stays as it is," I said. Sophia met my eyes and smiled, but it didn't reach her lips. It was all muscle memory. I turned, walked to the doorway, and reached into my pocket. My fingers found the small brass key. I didn't raise my voice. I just locked the cedar chest and put the key in my pocket. The law office smelled faintly of toner and ambition. Patel's firm sat high above Midtown 28th floor, glass panels reflecting a skyline that looked cleaner than it really was. Down below, sirens drifted between the buildings like restless ghosts. I ran my thumb along the edge of the Mont Blanc pen on the table. It wasn't mine, Patel's. Everything in that office gleamed polished walnut, tight lines, no fingerprints. He adjusted his glasses and tapped the folder between us. "You're sure about the clause?" "Crystal," I said. He flipped a page, his voice smooth and cautious. "Conditional Philanthropic Trust Ruth Hayes Foundation. 55 million. Fully funded through the sale of your commercial properties and municipal bonds. Dedicated to scholarships and first responder support." He looked up. "Released to occur at the public event hosted by the bride's family, your son's wedding reception." "Right." He continued reading, slower now. unless the honoree demonstrates contempt for the values commemorated. I leaned back. Then what? Then, Patel said, tapping the clause with his pen, the funds automatically route to an alternate slate of beneficiaries pre-approved by you. No contest, no reversal. I nodded once. Make the alternates local. The ones who keep the lights on when everyone else hides behind glass. He gave a half smile. You mean the people who still show up when it rains? Exactly. He clicked the pen and handed it to me. Sign here and here. The nib scratched lightly across the paper. I watched the ink spread dark, permanent. Patel looked over the document again, scanning for errors he wouldn't find. You realize this could cause waves? 55 million isn't Kiet. It's not supposed to be loud, I said. It's supposed to mean something. He paused, studying me. And if they cross the line? They won't just lose money, I said. They'll lose what it stood for. Patel nodded. That's one way to teach legacy. The printer beside his desk whirred softly, spitting out wire confirmations from Bank of America. 55 million divided cleanly into trust accounts. The numbers looked sterile on paper, but I knew what they represented. Whole neighborhoods rebuilt, scholarships for kids whose parents didn't come home from calls, equipment upgrades that would keep strangers alive. I thought of Ruth. The way she'd whisper, "Make it count, Walt. Not loud. Just count." I folded the ceremonial check and slid it into the inside pocket of my jacket. The paper's weight was strange light, but powerful, like holding oxygen. Patel gathered the documents. I'll file the compliance paperwork today. IRS. Form 5227, all fiduciary boxes checked. Your contingency beneficiaries are locked in. Good, I said. That's the part that matters. He stood, buttoning his jacket. Walter, this isn't revenge, right? I met his eyes. No, I said quietly. It's insurance. When I stepped into the hallway, the elevator button stuck for a second before lighting up a tiny imperfection in an otherwise perfect system. The kind of thing only someone who's trained to notice would notice. I rode down alone. The city's hum pressed against the walls. On the street, a fire truck turned the corner, siren wailing, lights cutting through the glass canyons of Midtown. I watched it disappear into traffic, a red streak swallowed by gray. Ruth would have smiled at that. I left the office with the check against my heart, and a condition sharp enough to cut marble. Summit Ridge Country Club looked like it had been designed to impress people who no longer remembered what impressed them. White linens, chandeliers too bright for comfort, orchids that smelled faintly of soap. Even the air felt manicured. The maitre d' greeted me by name, but hesitated when I said I'd drive myself. Apparently everyone else had valets. I caught my reflection in a mirror near the entrance. Suit pressed, tie straight, nothing out of place. You can't tell by looking which man in a room no longer belongs there. Evan was by the bar, already surrounded. His fiancée's crowd clean laughs, manicured confidence had turned the rehearsal dinner into a small-scale shareholder meeting. Their talk was soft but sharp, about positions, exits, visibility. Sophia saw me before Evan did. She smiled the way a hostess does when the uninvited shows up anyway. Walter? You made it. Her father, Victor, extended a hand that felt like a contract. Couldn't have the rehearsal without the man who started the story, right? Something like that, I said. Dinner began with champagne, and the kind of jazz that sounds expensive but feels hollow. A saxophone meandered somewhere in the background, while waiters in black aprons replaced my water before I could finish it. I stayed quiet, taking in the details. The glint of Rolexes, a Dior clutch resting on a napkin like a pet, a whispered joke about how much liquidity comes from marrying right. Then Sophia stood, glass in hand. Her circle stilled. To reinvention, she began, voice light and clear. Evan and I believe families evolve, and sometimes some legacies age out. The laughter came quick, precise, a dozen polite stabs disguised as amusement. Victor followed smoothly. We're excited to integrate the Hayes name into something modern. I looked at Evan. He was standing beside her, head slightly bowed, fingers adjusting his cufflink. He didn't speak, didn't even flinch. I raised my seltzer. A good name isn't software, I said, voice steady. It doesn't get version updates. A few chuckles scattered around the table, mostly from people too polite to ignore an old man. Sophia didn't laugh. She smiled. But obsolete systems, she said sweetly, get sunsetted. Of. The room tilted. A soft gasp. Someone stifled a nervous laugh. Evan's jaw tightened, but he stayed still. I could feel the check in my inside pocket, a folded promise, the weight of $55 million in silence. For a moment, I thought about standing up, about telling them what they were really celebrating, but no, not yet. Instead, I took a slow sip of my drink. A waiter leaned close to refill my glass and whispered, almost apologetically, I used to see your trucks on Route 9. My brother's with Ladder 12. Said you taught him everything. That tiny moment quiet, human cut through the noise sharper than Sophia's line ever could. I nodded. Tell him I said to keep his gloves dry. The rest of the night blurred into surface pleasantries. A toast to growth, a photo beside the floral arch, laughter like static. I let them pose me next to Sophia, who angled her face toward the camera, careful not to touch me. When the flash went off, I saw Evan's eyes flick toward mine. He looked trapped by ambition, by her, maybe by himself. But pity is a useless thing. I left it on the table next to my untouched dessert. As the jazz faded into small talk, I reached for my jacket. The check was still there, folded against my chest like a heartbeat. I smiled for the photos and made a list in my head long enough to burn through the night. The sunlight hit the gates like a camera flash, bright, staged, unreal. I'd arrived early. Old habit. Fire captains are never late, even to events that no longer feel like theirs. Summit Ridge Country Club gleamed ahead, all manicured hedges and champagne tents, a world wrapped in white ribbon. The security booth hummed quietly, air conditioning leaking through the cracked window. A young guard stepped out, crisp uniform, earpiece glowing blue. Name, Seer? I handed him the embossed invitation, gold lettering, heavy paper, the kind of stationery that smells expensive. Walter Hayes, father of the groom. He glanced down, then up, hesitation flickering. One moment, sir. Behind him, a black SUV door opened. Out stepped Isabella Sophia's mother, draped in pale silk and entitlement. Her smile was the kind that could freeze a room. Walter, she said, drawing out my name like she was testing its weight. So glad you could make it. She turned to the guard. If he makes a scene, remove him. The words were casual, not whispered. Meant to be overheard. I kept my tone even. I'm his father. Her smile didn't waver. And he's a grown man. The guard's shoulders stiffened. Sir, I can't. Orders. For a moment, I just looked at her, the kind of long, level look that used to make rookies stop talking in the middle of a sentence. She didn't flinch. Evan appeared behind her, tuxedo perfect, posture rehearsed. He looked like a man posing for his own life. Dad, he said quietly, glancing around to see who might be watching. Not today, not today. I waited for him to say something else to correct her, to step forward, to remember, but he didn't. He adjusted his cufflinks instead. I nodded once. Copy that. Isabella's eyes flicked to the guard. Thank you. Make sure he stays on the public side of the property. The guard hesitated again, like he wanted to apologize but didn't know how. Sorry, Seer. Don't be, I said. You're following orders. I used to do the same. He blinked, not sure what that meant. The gates closed behind them with a soft electric buzz, the kind of sound that feels final. I stood on the curb, the faint smell of cut grass mixing with gasoline from the nearby service road. My reflection shimmered in the glass of the guard booth, a man too calm to look humiliated. An oak leaf skittered across the asphalt, brittle and dry, spinning once before it stopped at my boot. The leaf was brown around the edges, burned from heat, not fire. I remember thinking how quiet it looked. Inside, I could see movement through the trees, servers carrying champagne, a white tent fluttering in the breeze, the kind of beauty that photographs well but doesn't last long. I could have made a scene. I could have shouted his name until someone came running. That's what they expected. But you don't win fires by yelling at them. You win by controlling oxygen. I pulled out my phone. The screen reflected my face, steady, unreadable. The same face that told families the truth after bad nights. The same one that stood over a burned-out stairwell and still walked down it. I opened my contacts list. The first number wasn't family, it hadn't been for years. It was Patel's office. Below it, Chief Morales. Then my banker. Then the scholarship board. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just clarity, the kind that comes after smoke clears and you see what's left standing. I stood where they could all see me and made the first call. The air inside the Lexus was cool, steady, AC purring low. Outside, the wedding music drifted faintly through the hedges distant, muffled, like a memory that had already started to rot. I parked half a block from the Summit Ridge gates, angled so I could still see the tented lawn in my rearview mirror. From here, I didn't look locked out. I looked stationed. The MacBook Air sat open on the passenger seat. My iPhone was synced to the car's Bluetooth, a digital command post. I'd spent a lifetime building a network that didn't rely on volume-only precision. Tonight, it would move quietly. First call, Chief Morales. He picked up on the second ring. Walter, tell me it's done. Not yet, I said, but hold the scholarship board's vote until further notice. No public explanation, just a procedural pause. He didn't argue. Understood. I'll draft the notice as a compliance review. One lever down. Next. Patel. My attorney's voice came filtered through Midtown static. Mr. Hayes? Trigger the public disrespect clause, I said. Prepare the alternate slate of beneficiaries. You know the list. Already anticipated, he said. The bank requires your confirmation. I glanced at the folded check in my jacket pocket. Confirmed. A soft ping. Confirmation email delivered. I moved to the third call, scrolling past personal contacts until I found J. Mallory, Ledger. Off the record, I said as soon as she picked up. You might want to check Summit Ridge Country Club's charitable compliance. Start with their vendor list and who they rent their ballroom to. Why? She asked. Because hypocrisy makes great copy. A low chuckle. Noted. When I hung up, I reached for the half-empty Starbucks cup in the holder. Cold now, the lid slightly warped. I took one sip anyway. It tasted like burnt resolve. Then came the nonprofit call. Tom, it's Walter. Pause all joint projects with Victor's firm pending review. Phrase it as conflict of interest policy enforcement. Don't publish, just freeze. Tom exhaled. That's gonna hurt them. Only if they built wrong. I stared at the dashboard clock. 4 minutes. That's all it had taken. The ecosystem didn't scream. It didn't grandstand. It just shifted its weight, and suddenly, those who'd called me outdated were standing on air. A soft gust shook the car. I glanced up at the windshield and saw a single oak leaf skid across the glass before vanishing into the breeze. I opened the visor to block the glare, and there it was, a folded grocery list Ruth had written years ago. The paper was faded, the ink barely legible. Milk, batteries, mercy. Mercy. I laughed once, a short, dry sound that didn't belong to humor. Then I folded the list back into its hiding place. Emails pinged in sequence on my phone. 3 completed actions. 1 pending. The phone buzzed again, Patel's follow-up text. Clause activated. Bank acknowledged. Funds locked. Alternate release scheduled upon breach confirmation. I read it twice, not for clarity but for satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, it was a correction. Outside, the faint strains of the quartet rose second waltz. Predictable, polished. People applauded. I imagined Sophia at the center of it, radiant in her certainty that she'd already won. She didn't know that while the music played, the ground beneath her social circle had shifted 2 inches to the left. That's all it takes for a structure to start cracking. By the time the string quartet reached the second waltz, 3 signatures had quietly changed the room. Crystal chandeliers cast reflections that danced across white tablecloths and sequined dresses. Forks clinked, champagne fizzed, and the jazz trio near the stage played a cover of Fly Me to the Moon. From where I stood just beyond the French doors, the night air on my shoulders, it all looked flawless. But if you've been around long enough, you can smell when something perfect starts to turn. The shift began small, like pressure before a storm. Near the catering station, 2 vendors leaned in close. Bank of America wire hold? One whispered. Just came through, the other murmured. Patel and Hayes Trust flagged for clause verification. The first vendor frowned. Clause? Something about conditions. Big money. Wedding event. The rumor didn't need confirmation, it just needed oxygen. Across the room, the club manager's phone buzzed. He read the message, jaw tightening. He adjusted his tie and scanned the room. Then his eyes flicked toward Victor. Victor's smile froze mid-conversation with a councilman. The color drained slightly from his face as he stepped closer to Isabella. "Who did he call?" he asked under his breath. Isabella smoothed the edge of her napkin. "It's optics," she said. "Hold your posture." They were still smiling, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the kind that starts to sweat under stage lighting. Meanwhile, Sophia leaned toward Evan. I could read her lips through the glass. "Tell him to leave. He's embarrassing the brand." Evan's voice was quieter, heavy. "I already did." I watched his shoulders sag as she looked away, pretending not to notice. From my spot outside, the French doors reflected the room back at me, a kaleidoscope of polished ambition starting to fracture. I could see everything. The orchestra tuning between songs. The way the head florist paused mid-adjustment of the orchid centerpiece when her phone buzzed. The slow confusion creeping up like humidity. Inside the kitchen doorway, a sous chef glanced at the club manager. "Sir, the second invoice, should we run it?" The manager shook his head. "Hold everything until we confirm compliance. Effective immediately. Compliance. A harmless word, until it isn't." Victor tried to keep his rhythm, laughing too loudly at something unfunny. Isabella took another sip of wine, too long, too slow. I could practically hear her mind racing behind those perfect lashes. They thought I'd left powerless. They didn't understand that my influence didn't sit in that check, it lived in people. In the volunteers who'd scrubbed floors beside me after hurricanes. In the contractors who'd built firehouses on handshake deals. In donors who respected quiet action more than any press release. When I shifted, they followed. Not because I demanded it, because I'd earned it. Through the glass, I caught Evan again. He wasn't looking at Sophia now. His gaze drifted toward the French doors, toward me. His hand brushed his cufflink, the same nervous tick he had as a boy when he'd struck out during Little League. Our eyes met for just a second, long enough for him to know that I wasn't angry. Just done. Memory split across my vision. A roofline at dusk, me and 3 men moving as one through smoke, the synchronized click of decision. That feeling when the team turns together, the sound of order, not chaos. I felt it again now. A busboy bumped a table, and a champagne flute toppled, shattering beside the wedding cake. Guests flinched, startled laughter rippling through the air. But laughter couldn't cover it. The ballroom had changed weather. Whispers now rode every corner. 55 million. Conditional. Gone. And outside, I waited. Waiting is a choice. When the first glass broke near the cake, I knew the wind had shifted. The ceremony lawn shimmered under the noon sun, white roses. White linen, white aisle runner, like a stripe of snow that led nowhere I needed to go. From where I stood, just beyond the French doors, I could see everything but touch nothing. The string quartet adjusted their sheet music. A whisper of tuning A, then silence. The crowd rustled into stillness, that collective inhale before performance. A single chair in the front row remained empty. It was mine. They'd tied Ruth's lavender ribbon around it, a gesture meant to look reverent. To everyone else, it was sentimental. To me, it was the lock on the door. The officiant stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We welcome family and friends as we join Sophia and Evan," he stopped. Just long enough for everyone to notice the pause, his eyes catching on the empty chair. Isabella leaned toward him, whispering something that carried farther than she intended. "Ignore the optics." "Oh." Her voice slithered through the air, polite as poison. I stood by the gate, still visible through the open glass. The guard shifted beside me, uncomfortable. "Sir, you can move to the shade if you want." "I'm fine here," I said. Inside, Sophia walked the aisle, her veil catching the light like water. The ribbon on Ruth's chair fluttered once, then stilled. When Sophia reached the altar, her smile looked practiced, teeth, angle, pause. Not joy. Instruction. The officiant continued. Voice steady again. "Marriage is a covenant of trust." Behind him, the quartet began the soft background waltz. Evan looked up then, just briefly. His eyes met mine through the glare of glass. I didn't move, didn't wave, just mouthed one word. "Stand." He hesitated. A breath, maybe 2. Then his jaw set, and he looked away. And that was it, the pattern complete. I'd mistaken his silence for confusion before, his compliance for grace. But silence repeated enough times becomes a language of its own. I understood it now. The officiant's voice blurred into white noise. I could see lips moving, flowers trembling, cameras flashing, but none of it reached me. Memory cut through the present. Evan at 12, sitting beside me on the dock at Lake Hopatcong, his fishing line tangled into a hopeless knot. "Sorry, Dad," he'd muttered near tears. I'd shown him how to loosen, not yank. You pull too hard, it tightens. You go gentle, it frees. He'd smiled then, relieved. My hands ached now with that old patience. The wind shifted. A loose thread on Sophia's veil lifted, fluttering against her cheek like a question that didn't want to be asked. The officiant reached the vows. "Do you, Evan Hayes?" I barely heard the rest. All I could see was the chair, Ruth's ribbon tied perfectly, the symbol of honor turned inside out. The seat that meant remember her now meant forget him. The audience smiled, unaware of the tectonic quiet under their feet. Only a few people in the back glanced toward the glass doors where I still stood. One of them was a young firefighter I'd trained years ago, serving now as a volunteer usher. His hand twitched in a half salute before he caught himself. Inside, the string quartet inhaled together the audible breath before the crescendo. And then, through the hum of violins, a sound broke clean and sharp. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. The name on the screen froze me. Not Patel, not Morales. Someone I did not expect. When the vows began, my phone buzzed once in my pocket. A name I did not expect. The vows blurred into background noise, soft applause. Manufactured joy, the sound of something sacred being said by people who didn't mean it. I stood outside the French doors, sunlight washing my reflection over the ballroom glass. From where I stood, I looked like a ghost watching his own funeral. That's when the phone buzzed. One vibration, then another. Unknown number. Blocked ID. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then I answered. "Mr. Hayes," the voice said. Metallic, filtered. The kind of distortion you get from a cheap voice modulator. "You don't know me. Then start with your name." A pause. I could hear faint static, maybe wind, maybe traffic. Then, "No, start with your mailbox." "Excuse me?" "There's a package. A USB. From someone you love. You should find it before anyone else does." I glanced through the glass. Inside, Isabella was smiling the perfect smile of a woman who'd already written the ending. Sophia stood beside her, veil catching the light. Evan's jaw was set in that polite, empty way that said damage control, not conscience. I stepped to the side, lowering my voice. "Why should I believe any of this?" The voice sharpened. "Because the bride's mother smiles when you bleed, and because your son, he's not as lost as he looks." Something in the way they said it calm, deliberate, cut through the noise in my head. Then the line went dead. No click, no goodbye, just silence. Inside, the string quartet shifted into something cheerful, their bows slicing bright, happy notes. It felt like laughter aimed at me. I looked down at my phone. No trace, no caller ID, no number to redial. Just the lingering chill of the voice. My training kicked in, quiet and automatic. Observe, orient, decide, act. I scanned the perimeter. A caterer ducked into the kitchen. A guard stood at the far gate, looking uneasy. The club manager's phone buzzed again in his hand. Someone inside was spreading panic while the music kept playing. I caught my reflection again in the glass. The sun made the French doors glare, so I couldn't see faces anymore, just shapes, outlines moving through light. For the first time that day, I wasn't humiliated. I was alert. I turned toward the parking lot. 22 minutes home with light traffic. Less if I skipped the parkway. The decision was already made before I'd reached my car. As I opened the door, I felt the weight of something small on my wrist. A ladybug, bright red against the black iron of the gate. It stayed there, stubbornly sunning itself, refusing to move even when the wind kicked up. I watched it for a second, the absurd calm of it. Then I brushed it gently onto a leaf and got in. My MacBook's notification light blinked once on the passenger seat. Patel had followed up. Clause enacted. Media inquiry inbound. It should have felt like victory. It didn't, not anymore. The voice's last words replayed in my head. From someone you love. That phrase coiled inside me. Someone I love. If it were Patel, he'd have said his name. If it were Morales, he'd have used the code phrase. This wasn't business. This was personal and dangerous. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of the ballroom through the rearview mirror. The sunlight bounced off the French doors, bright enough to blind. Behind it, I could almost see Evan turning toward the empty chair just for a second, as if realizing something had shifted. I stepped away from the French doors, and the quartet's bright music faded like a lie you've heard too many times. By the time I turned onto my street, the light had gone gold. The kind of quiet evening that used to feel like peace before it started to feel like a warning. The red flag on my mailbox stood up, straight bright against the dimming sky, like a small alarm waiting for someone slow enough to miss it. I pulled to the curb. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and engine oil. No other cars. No joggers. Just that one detail, the flag, and a pulse that started behind my jaw. Inside the mailbox was a plain manila envelope. No postage. No handwriting except for a single typed line. Listen alone. I stood there for a long second, feeling the evening shift around me. The street lamps hadn't clicked on yet. A crow called somewhere near the park. It sounded like someone laughing without humor. In the kitchen, I locked the door and set everything down on the butcher block counter. The house was dim, soft lamplight hitting the omega on my wrist, glinting off the MacBook Air. CNN played silently on the wall-mounted TV, bright faces mouthing words I couldn't hear. I positioned the Ring camera toward the porch habit. You don't open a door without covering the exit. Then I slit the envelope open. A USB, black, unmarked. I plugged it into the MacBook. The drive mounted instantly. One file, Audio 001, M4A. I put on my headphones, pressed play. The sound came alive, soft background chatter, a hum of air conditioning. Then a woman's voice. Isabella. Once he's locked out, the optics are ours. Another voice followed Sophia's. Lighter, but sharper. And the house follows. He'll fold. He's old. Ice clinked in a glass. The sound was too close, too real. Then Isabella again, cool and precise. He doesn't fold, he burns, so, insurance. A pause. Sophia. You mean? Isabella. He runs alone. Night walks. Stairs he won't fix. Accidents happen. People grieve better when the paperwork is clean. The faint sound of a laugh. Not nervous. Practiced. Then another man's voice harder to place, muffled. Victor? Don't put that in texts. Oh. The audio ended there. I sat still, the headphones pressing tight against my temples. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between breaths. It sounded like someone breathing steadily beside me, calm and unhurried. My fingers moved automatically. Command-C, Command-V, duplicate file. Then check some verification digital fingerprint confirmed. I uploaded one copy to encrypted cloud storage, another to an external drive I kept for pension paperwork. Chain of custody, documented, clean. On the counter, the omega ticked steady, mechanical, alive. Ruth's voice surfaced in the quiet. A memory from the hospital hallway years ago, when she'd comforted a young firefighter's wife after a line-of-duty death. We love men who run into fire, she'd said, but not the fire that pretends to be love. At the time, I'd thought she meant danger. I understand now she meant betrayal. The light from the lamppost outside slipped across the blinds, striping the wall like a barcode. I realized my breathing had slowed into that old rhythm, measured, operational. The way it used to be on call nights when things went wrong and you had to move before panic caught up. I closed the laptop, unplugged the USB, sealed it in a Ziploc, and placed it in Ruth's cedar chest. The key went back into my pocket. The Ring camera's blue light blinked, armed and ready. I saved the file 3 ways and realized I would not take another stare in the dark without a hand on the rail. The Ring chime broke the silence, soft, polite, completely out of place. Outside, dusk had turned the porch blue. The air hummed with cicadas. When I opened the door, Evan stood there, no tux jacket, tie undone, hair flattened like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. For a second, I saw the boy who used to come home late from baseball practice, trying to invent an excuse before he reached the porch light. "Dad," he said, voice hoarse. Can I? You knew Isabella was alive. He froze halfway through a breath. I did. The words came out small. The porch light flickered once. A moth kept slamming itself against the bulb, stubborn and dumb. You let me mourn a ghost, I said. At a lawyer's table. You sat there while they built your brand on a lie. He swallowed. It wasn't supposed to go this far. 2 years ago, Isabella said the diagnosis would keep press attention away from the probate. I thought if I played along we'd get through the wedding clean and then I'd... His voice cracked. Drift back. I looked at him. That's not drift. That's desertion. He nodded, eyes glassy. I know. Neither of us moved. The cicadas kept time. The moth hit the bulb again, wings catching the light like paper on fire. Why are you here? I asked. Evan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver USB. He held it like it was heavier than it looked. Because I recorded something, and I can't let them keep doing this. What is it? A FaceTime call. Sophia and Isabella. It was last month. I was supposed to be out of the house, but her iPad pinged in the office, connected to the same Apple ID as her phone. His voice trembled. I didn't mean to see it, but I did. So I hit screen record. He placed the USB in my palm, careful, like passing a relic. I felt its cold edge against my skin. Why now? He looked down at the porch boards. Because tonight, when they locked you out, I realized I was next. Not the way you think financially, spiritually. They hollow people out. They almost hollowed me. A small laugh escaped me. It wasn't humor. It was disbelief scraped raw. Do you even understand what you did? I said quietly. You didn't just stand by. You watched the match light. He blinked hard. I know. I kept telling myself you were strong enough to take it. But when I saw you standing there outside the gate... He stopped, chest tightening. I'm sorry. That word sorry had worn itself out between us years ago. I don't want your apology, I said. I want accuracy. He nodded quickly, desperate to be useful. The video has the timestamp top right corner, same as FaceTime. I exported it directly, no edits. The date's visible. You'll see everything. He glanced toward the driveway, like he expected headlights. They'll realize I'm gone soon. They'll know. Then you'd better not be here when they do. He hesitated. What happens now? I didn't answer. I just looked at him long enough for the silence to become its own sentence. He stepped backward off the porch, shoulders slumped, the cicadas drowning his last words. You'll know what to do with it. I watched him disappear down the sidewalk, tie trailing, jacket over one shoulder, a man half built and half broken. Inside, the fridge hummed, and the faint glow from Ruth's cedar chest cast a long shadow across the floor. I set the new USB beside the first one, the two of them cold and quiet, like twin matches waiting to be struck. I didn't hug my son. I told him to come back inside with me and sit while I pressed play. I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe, even if it only takes a second. What time is it for you, and where are you listening? The study was the one room in the house untouched by staging, lavender, or pretense. Just wood, paper, and light. Ruth's framed commendation hung above the desk, mine below it. A quiet hierarchy that never needed explaining. Evan sat in the armchair, elbows on knees, eyes hollow. The glow from the monitor lit his face like he was watching a fire burn in reverse heat, pulling away instead of spreading. I clicked play. The FaceTime recording began with Isabella's reflection in a mirror perfectly composed, champagne glass just out of frame. Sophia's face appeared smaller, angled for instruction. Isabella's tone was measured, like a CEO explaining quarterly results. If he trips, we grieve. If he fights, we litigate. Sophia nodded, chewing on her lower lip. What if he gives the speech about the gift? He won't. He's proud, Isabella said, smiling faintly. Proud men need bruises before they crawl. A third voice, Victor, faint but unmistakable. Keep it verbal. Never text a crime. The recording froze on Isabella's raised eyebrow. Metadata timestamp. 31 days ago. Evan's hand covered his mouth. Jesus! I didn't answer. I reached for Ruth's old Mont Blanc from the drawer, the one she'd used to write grocery lists on thick paper. The nib was cool against my fingers. Write it down, Walt, she'd always said. People forget what they said. Not this time. I opened a new folder on the desktop. Hayes, case, chain of custody. Command C. Command V. Duplicate. Then checksum verification. SHA-256 hash confirmed. I uploaded both USB copies to an encrypted cloud drive, activated two-factor authentication, and labeled the directory with today's date. Procedure wasn't comfort, it was control. Next, I opened my email to Patel. Subject line: Evidence. Isabella divided by Sophia conspiracy. Attachments: FaceTime recording. MOV. Transcript. PDF. Declaration draft. Docs. Body text. Patel: I am confirming possession of two identical digital evidence files, primary and mirrored. Metadata preserved. Timestamp verified. Do not disseminate without DA intake confirmation. W. H. I hit send. The MacBook chimed softly. Evan exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Dad, what happens now? I ignored the question. Picked up the phone. Pressed the contact for Patel. Put him on speaker. Mr. Hayes, Patel said, voice even. I received your email. I'll notify the DA's intake after I mirror the files. Keep everything read. Only. Do not confront them physically. I won't, I said. When the call ended, I scrolled through contacts again. Stopped at Reverend K, the officiant. He answered on the second ring. Voice hushed like he was still inside the ballroom. Walter? You should know, I said quietly, what's about to be played in a room you're standing in. There was a pause. Then, I'm listening. I didn't need to say more. He'd officiated 3 funerals for my department. He understood timing and consequence. I printed 2 transcripts, the laser printer warming the air, the scent of hot paper mixing with old dust. Each page slid into a manila folder labeled in black ink. June 22. Witness copy. Evan watched me, throat tight. You're going back there? They locked me out, I said, sliding the folder into my briefcase. That makes it the right address. He didn't argue. When the printer spat the last page, I capped the Mont Blanc and reached for my keys. The band was still tuning when I walked back into Summit Ridge. The sound of strings warming up blended with the low chatter of people drunk on comfort and champagne. The air smelled of sugar and nerves. The cake stood near the stage, white marble tiers, a monument to control. I stopped just inside the door, folder under my arm. No guard this time. The manager saw me and hesitated, his phone lighting up with notifications he didn't read. He knew. The officiant spotted me from across the room and nodded once our silent, prearranged signal. He stepped to the microphone, the wedding band faltering mid-jazz riff. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice steady but carrying. Before we continue this celebration, I ask for a moment of truth. The ballroom quieted. Forks hovered midair. Isabella turned toward him, eyes narrowed. What is the meaning of this? The officiant gestured toward the screen behind the dance floor. We paused to honor a father who was asked to stay outside. Before we bless this union, we must hear something difficult. A few people looked toward the back doors, where I stood uninvited, unremoved. Isabella's voice sharpened. Turn that off, Reverend. This is not your place. He didn't respond. He lifted a small remote. The sound system crackled, feedback stinging the air. Then the recording began. Isabella's voice filled the room, clear as winter glass. If he trips, we grieve. If he fights, we litigate. Gasps. A ripple through the tables. Phones rose like a field of silver periscopes. Sophia's voice followed, smaller, sharper. What if he gives the speech about the gift? Isabella again. He won't. He's proud. Proud men need bruises before they crawl. Then, the fatal line. Accidents happen. A single fork clattered to the floor. The sound carried through the hush like a gunshot. Sophia lurched forward. Turn that off? This is illegal. I stepped through the doorway. Voice even. So is conspiracy. Victor shot to his feet, face drained. Security! The manager, pale and sweating, didn't move. Not today, sir. The guests whispered, a wave of shock moving from table to table. Some stared at their phones, already recording. Others looked at Isabella, waiting for her to blink. She didn't. She just stared at me, the smile gone, eyes calculating paths that no longer existed. I stood still, no triumph, no speech. The work was already done. Ruth would have hated the spectacle, every spotlight, every gasp. But I remembered her other sentence. Don't let bullies whisper. Make them speak loudly, so decent people recognize the sound. The recording ended with Victor's muffled warning. Don't put that in texts. Then, silence. Evan stood beside Sophia, face ashen, chest rising fast. For a moment I thought he'd stay frozen, but then something shifted the smallest step forward, then another. He moved away from her, away from them. "Dad," he said, voice cracking through the microphone's reverb. "This is my fault. I should have—" I shook my head once. "Not your line right now." He stopped, breathing hard, the realization catching up. He looked at Sophia, at the woman who'd turned him into a spectator of his own betrayal, and something in his face finally broke. The guests began to murmur again, half pity, half awe. The officiant lowered the mic. I took one last look at the room. The same space where they'd toasted reinvention now smelled of panic and frosting. Phones kept flashing, capturing what couldn't be undone. Ruth's ribbon, still tied to the front chair, fluttered once in the air conditioning. A ghost witnessing justice. I reached into my jacket, not for a check, but for the envelope. The ballroom no longer felt like theirs. It hummed with the weight of something real: truth, consequence, oxygen returning after a long choke. The officiant handed me the microphone. I didn't ask for it. The crowd wanted it passed to me, and for once they didn't look away. I stepped to the center of the room. The lights from a dozen phones followed me, little red live dots blinking like witnesses. "The $55 million I plan to dedicate tonight," I began, "is not a dowry, it's a promise." A ripple moved through the tables, forks lowering, glasses freezing midair. "The clause was simple," I continued. "Honor the work, or lose the gift." From the head table, Victor leaned forward, color climbing his neck. "You can't—" "I already did." "Oh." I took a folded document from my pocket, held it in one hand. "Bank confirmations are in my counsel's files. Effective immediately, the Ruth Hayes Foundation funds are rerouted to 3 alternate beneficiaries, each already notified by my attorney, each with signed acceptance on file." I looked around the room, faces pale, some ashamed, some relieved. "First," I said, "the Academy Scholarship Board for Children of Fallen First Responders. Second, the National Widows Mortgage Relief Fund. And third, the Pediatric Burn Unit at NYC Health Plus hospitals, because children should not pay for adults' vanity." The room went still. From the back, a voice broke the quiet. A woman in a navy dress stood up, firefighter widow. I recognized her face from the last memorial. Her hands trembled slightly as she began to clap. One person, then another, then a wave. It spread like a brush fire in reverse, putting things out, not lighting them. Victor tried to rise, but the sound drowned him out. Isabella sat motionless, her glass untouched, the mask gone. Sophia's fingers clutched the tablecloth like she could hold the room together by force. My eyes swept the crowd. The donors, the neighbors, the people who'd watched me carry bodies out of burning homes and thought I'd been extinguished too. They saw now that I wasn't. "I built the foundation in my wife's name," I said. "Not for inheritance, for integrity. Tonight it fulfills its mission, exactly as written." "Oh." The manager's phone buzzed. He glanced down, eyes wide. "It's live," he whispered to no one in particular. "It's trending." Someone had already streamed, the moment the red dot still glowing on their screen. In seconds, the story would belong to the world. Evan stood beside me, silent, steady, the light catching on his undone tie. He didn't need to say anything. His presence was the line Ruth would have wanted remorse, standing next to resolve. I paused, scanning the room one last time. "I'm not here for applause," I said quietly. "I'm here to set the record straight. Legacy doesn't belong to those who inherit it. It belongs to those who protect it." The applause rose again, this time steadier, heavier, a sound that carried more weight than clapping ever should. At the head table, Sophia's phone buzzed nonstop. Isabella's hand covered hers, like that would stop the flood. I felt Ruth's laugh in the back of my mind, quiet, approving. Make it count. So I did. When the applause finally ebbed, I looked down at the document in my hand and then at the microphone. "There's one more piece of business," I said, "and it will not be handled in this room." The humid air outside the club felt heavier than it should have. like the night had been holding its breath through the whole event. Cruiser lights flashed in slow, respectful rhythm. No sirens, no scene, just quiet procedure. Patel stood beside me, tie loosened, his briefcase resting on the stone ledge of the portico. Two detectives approached, body cameras already recording. The older one, badge clipped to his belt, spoke first. "Mr. Hayes," he said evenly, "we understand you possess recordings. Can you confirm chain of custody?" I handed him the written declaration. USB 1 delivered to my mailbox at 1842 hours. Ring camera captured timestamp. Second USB from my son at 1911. I created checksums, mirrored both to an encrypted cloud drive, and emailed counsel within the hour. He flipped through the paperwork, nodding as he read. "We'll take copies, not originals, tonight." Patel stepped forward, hand out. "And a receipt." The detective smiled faintly. "And a receipt?" Behind us, the ballroom door creaked shut slow, final. The sound of a book closing. A younger officer took photos of the labeled envelopes on the hood of the cruiser. The flash briefly lit the reflection of the club's brass logo, half obscured by my shadow. They logged each USB in evidence bags, sealed and initialed. The older detective glanced at me, something like respect in his expression. "You did this right, Captain. You kept the paper trail clean." "Old habits," I said. "You learn to document fires before you fight them." Patel's phone buzzed. He glanced down, nodded. "DAS intake acknowledged receipt. They'll log this case number before midnight." Then my own phone vibrated Chief Morales. The text read, "We stand with you. Proud of the example, brother." Another buzz. "Vendor email. Effective immediately. Victor Corp. Suspended from municipal bids pending review." And another. From the Neighborhood Watch Group. A repost of the story, already trending. A photo of me at the mic. Ruth's ribbon visible on the chair behind me. Caption: "Don't let money bully the men who run toward fire." I stared at the screen for a moment, thumb hovering. Then I locked it. Some things don't need replies. The detective looked around at the few onlookers by the valet circle, waitstaff, neighbors, a handful of guests lingering on the steps. "You'll get formal updates from the DA's office," he said. "Tonight, you go home. Let us work the rest." I nodded. I've been waiting to hear those words. He tipped his hat slightly, then turned to the cruiser. Patel followed, ensuring the chain of custody was filmed on body cam, every signature captured. The night was thick with the hum of crickets and a single cicada's cry. Someone from inside the club cracked open the door to look out, then closed it again quickly when they saw the uniforms. Evan hovered by the column, still in his shirt sleeves, the top button undone. He hadn't said a word since the applause inside. He just watched the police lights reflect on the marble steps. A memory surfaced: Ruth wrapping a sandwich for a rookie after his first fatal call. "Feed the good first," she'd whispered to me when I tried to take the sandwich for myself. Now, watching an officer accept a bottle of water from one of the club staff, I thought, good, fed. That's how change starts. Patel returned, paperwork complete. "You're clear, Walt. They'll file overnight. We'll handle statements tomorrow." I nodded, slow, feeling the weight of what hadn't burned. The cruiser door closed with a soft thunk. The lights faded as it rolled down the hill, taking with it the rumor and replacing it with record. When the last reflection of blue disappeared from the asphalt, Evan finally found his voice, and it wasn't a child's voice anymore. "I guess 99% of you will hear this, sigh, and scroll past, not clicking like or subscribe. Even if it only takes a second, what time is it for you, and where are you listening?" A week later, the air at the VFW hall smelled of coffee, waxed floors, and slow-cooked chili. Wood paneling framed the stage. A cheap mic squealed once before someone fixed it with a bored thump. Ruth's photo sat on the table next to a vase of carnations pink, like she always preferred for spring events. The scholarship night wasn't meant for spectacle. It was local, modest, the kind of gathering where people still shake hands twice, once when they arrive, once when they leave. Evan sat 2 rows back, shoulders squared, tie slightly off. I'd seen that posture before, the stance of a man about to tell the truth for the first time in a long while. When they called his name, he stood. The chatter quieted. Forks paused over paper plates. He walked to the microphone, adjusted it, and spoke without looking at me first. "I let people tell me who I was," he began. "I chose status over the man who taught me to stand. I'm sorry, Dad. He didn't reach for tears. He didn't reach for applause. Just said the words and waited. For a moment, nothing moved. Then one clap. Then another. Then the whole room. Not loud, not wild, just solid. I stood, met him halfway at the podium. Remorse, I said, is a beginning, not a pass. He nodded once. What do I do? I took out a folder. Inside, a single page typed in 12-point Times New Roman. The top line read, Family Boundary Agreement. We sign this, I said. We live by it. I read aloud. No money without service. No decisions without transparency. No rooms repurposed without consent. The hall listened like it was a sermon, or maybe a rescue plan. Evan nodded. I'll start at the academy kitchen. Saturday shifts, scholarship interviews too, if they'll have me. They'll have you, I said, but you earn it every week. Patel, never off duty, had arranged for a notary from the credit union. She stepped forward, pen poised, official but kind. She stamped the page with a soft thunk that left a faint ring of blue ink on the tablecloth. Oddly satisfying. Evan signed first, then me. The paper smelled faintly of toner and accountability. The applause this time was warmer, no pity, no spectacle. Just people who understood service when they saw it being relearned. I took the mic. Tonight, I said, isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. Ruth used to tell me that dignity isn't something you keep, it's something you keep earning. Heads nodded across the room. Firefighters, spouses, kids in academy shirts. The scholarship fund will carry her name, I continued. The rules will carry her values. And from this night on, we protect those values not with anger, but with structure. The notary packed up her stamp. The crockpots hissed quietly. Someone's child laughed near the soda table, breaking the tension. Evan came to stand beside me, shoulders finally level instead of slumped. He didn't need my approval. He just needed direction. And for the first time since the wedding, the silence between us wasn't distance, it was space. In my jacket pocket, I could still smell Ruth's lavender scarf. I didn't take it out. I didn't need to. The scent was faint and clean, like a room finally put back in order. After the ceremony, I folded the signed agreement next to the scholarship list and slipped both into my briefcase. Forgiveness, I thought, starts with paperwork and ends with behavior. As the hall lights dimmed and the crowd drifted out into the parking lot, I stayed a moment longer, looking at Ruth's photo. Boundaries, I whispered. We finally built them right.